Welcome, Chess Meal viewers. So this is the second part of a series on the Philidor position. So last time we told you all about François-André Philidor, although we didn't mention that there's also an opening named after him called the Philidor Defense. But what we're going to focus this video on is the second Philidor position, which is a winning position for white with a rook and a bishop against a rook and a king. So just to recap, last time we discussed this position, the first Philidor position, in which black can in fact draw even though he's down a pawn in a rook endgame, and the key is to control the c6 square and to control the third rank. And today we're going to discuss bishop and rook against rook, and actually a win. This is actually a win for white. But before we do that, let's just quickly tell you about the Philidor Defense. So Philidor was a Frenchman in the 18th century who, for about 50 years, was the unofficial world champion of the world. He was the first to understand the importance of pawn structures, but he played a very solid style and didn't gambit as much as the people of his time used to. And the very solid opening named after him is a slightly passive and so almost never played at the Masters level nowadays, but it's moved to d6 for black. And probably the most common response for white is d4, after which there are many options for black. You could go e takes d4, that's been played in fact several times by Mamedyarov. And there's something else called the lion variation, or the black lion, or the Hanam variation, which is knight f6 in this position. And it goes like so. Castles, castles, so very solid setup for black. No fireworks. But then there's another move after d4, actually attributed to Philidor himself, called the Philidor counter gambit. And that is f5. Now this is actually a really bad opening. It has been played by Nakamura at the highest level, but he lost the game. It's not a good move. The computer would recommend bishop c4 as a response, but a very stable way, if anyone did ever play this opening against you, is just to take the free pawn. The idea being that if he takes your d pawn, you take back and then defend that pawn. Whereas if he takes the pawn, then we simply take here, takes, and this is also a complete disaster for black. So probably the best try for black in this position, and the most scary in a way, is e4, but then we simply got knight g5, then he takes, and what we do is we just pile up pressure on this pawn, d5, d5 does come, but probably knight f, so d5 and knight f6 in some order. And then the key move for white is f3. So we're piling up pieces on this pawn. 1, 2, 3 pieces, only 2 defenders. And the point is, if he plays a move like d5, takes, bishop c4, okay, so he doesn't lose the pawn, but white's pieces are very active. He's going to castle, have a rook on the f file. It's almost impossible to defend the f7 square. This is really a nasty position for black to have to play. So going all the way back, another way of playing it is to play bishop c4, that key move, directly. And then there's an interesting variation where you attack that bishop to force it to drop back. And then you play knight takes e5. And so you're implicitly hanging your queen. And if your opponent doesn't want the queen, then you have a free bishop, and he doesn't have a free bishop back because of this check picking up the knight. So it's a way of winning. So this knight takes e5 is therefore, at the end of that line, you've won a pawn and all your pieces are very active. And the point of this line, of course, is that the queen is in fact poisoned. And if he takes that queen, then we arrive at something called Legal's mate. Knight b5 checkmate. So this comes about from against Philidor's defense if black misplays it. Just a word about the two knights. Notice how the two knights control all the green squares. So you have a line of 4 in a row, and then two wings. So you have this whole sequence. And the only two squares the knights don't control are the two blue squares. One of which is blocked off, and the other one of which is controlled by the bishop, which actually also controls the square falling back. It's quite useful to always recognize two knights together, the squares they control. If they're next to each other, they control this formation. If the knights were, say, here, here, and here, they would control this formation. So anyway, this is something you can play around with on your own to try and play with what squares do knights control. But this is all a slight distraction from the subject of today's Sunday study session, which is going to be not about knights at all, but about rook and bishop against a rook. So this is the second Philidor position. And it turns out that rook and bishop against rook, the rook and bishop can win. And in fact, it's actually quite a hard position for black to defend in general. But this particular position is thematic, because if white can get into this position, there's a very clear forcing sequence, long but very forcing, for how to proceed. Okay, just to say briefly, if it were white to move in this position, the strategy is clear. Just swing the rook over to the other side and checkmate on the back rank. And the reason is because even if the king were to run, this square here is controlled by the bishop, so there's nowhere to run to. So rook here, king here, rook here would be checkmate. So that is white's threat in this position. So now it's black to move. So we're looking from white's perspective, but it's going to be black to move. Okay, so if black moves the king, we can actually do exactly the same thing. We swing the rook over, and if he moves the king again, this is still checkmate. Now this is a very important pattern to recognize, the bishop and the rook combining up. And then the king is keeping the black king on the back rank. There's nothing else black can do in this position, so moving the king is no good. What about moving the rook? Well, there's only one square on the back rank that black could move the rook to. This one is guarded by the bishop. But if black does this, we have exactly the same idea. We just go here and checkmate on the back rank. And there's no running anywhere because these two squares are controlled, so this is checkmate. And if he goes here, this is also checkmate. So these two squares are controlled. So black's only idea might be to throw in a check himself, and we just parry it. And now the king is even more controlled, and this is checkmate. Or black sacks his rook for the bishop, and then we just have a rook endgame. So, and if we were to continue the rook endgame, the black king might come and try and chase down the rook. But the mating technique is quite simple. You use the rook to cut off the black king on one file, and then you come in and deliver checkmate. And even if you'd made a hash of it, and you find yourself in this position where it's your move and you can't quite deliver the mate, then you deliver something called a waiting move. And it's very important in endgames, this concept of the waiting move. So you simply drop back, and black only has one move. Okay, and the idea of the waiting move is similar to the idea of Zugzwang. If you do a waiting move, you put your opponent into Zugzwang. Black can do nothing but go into the corner, and then you deliver the checkmate. So the concepts are intertwined. The concept of the waiting move and the concept of Zugzwang, and both are very important in endgames. And we'll see many examples of it, both in the second Philidor position and later in the third Philidor position next time. So, going back to the beginning again, we've seen that king move doesn't work because we just swing the rook over and deliver mate. The rook move doesn't work for the same reason. So the rook must move along this file. This square is taken, we can capture it, that's protected, protected, and protected. So there are only 3 squares left for the rook. Now very interestingly, if we had the Philidor position in a 9x9 board, I think that's a draw for black. So we're going to exploit the fact that there are only 3 squares here for the black rook. And I'm first going to show you the worst of those 3 squares, which is this one. And then we're going to show you how, if the black rook moves to the other squares, there's a way of forcing it into the position where it's moved to the 3rd rank. Now the reason why the 3rd rank is weak is linked to the fact, well, we'll see, but it's linked to the fact that these 2 squares are controlled, and also this is on a dark square, and our bishop is a dark coloured bishop. So the proof technique, the mating technique is as follows. You first dislodge the king, and first there's an easy line to deal with, which is if the king goes the wrong way. If he goes this way, we simply go to the H file and we're threatening to deliver mate on H8. There's simply no defense. I mean, the only defense is to try and interpose your rook, but the bishop is just perfectly positioned to capture such a rook. As we said before, if the king tries to keep running, this is still checkmate. So the king has to run the other way. So now the king and the rook are lined up. So notice how the rook can't interpose because there are any checks on the back rank because they're in the same file. So what we do then is we threaten checkmate and there is no defense for black except to keep running. And now if we tried to deliver the check, the rook would come back and we haven't achieved anything. So what we do is we try and push the king back to the same file as its rook. And we're going to succeed because if the king were to keep running, then we simply have a discovered check picking up the rook. If the rook were to block the check, we just take it. So now we've got the king on the same rank as the rook, and now is the slightly subtle move. We drop our rook back to the 4th rank. So it's similar to what we did, but for completely different reasons, in the Philidor position, rook and pawn versus, not the Philidor position, the Lucena position, when we're trying to form a bridge. When we're the winning side, we're trying to form a bridge, you drop back to the 4th rank. But this is a completely different idea, but it's again the 4th rank. And the reason is because we want to control this square. And the reason we want to control this square is because we want to drop our bishop back to stop any checks on our king. But we have a double motive, double threat. The other threat, and much more serious threat, is bishop f6 check. The king is cut, so we'd have to go back in front of the king, and then rook c8 checkmate. So this is actually a really serious threat. Bishop f6 check, and rook here checkmate. So black can't do nothing. If he tries to interpose the rook, the bishop controls that square. Okay, he could try and run, and that's when we can actually block off this rook file, and now we're again threatening mate on the back rank, and black has no checks on our king, so he's forced to go back, and then we can deliver the check and checkmate. So moving the king doesn't escape the mate. Black's best try is probably to pin that bishop. But then white has a very cunning move, which is just to slide the rook over 1 rank further away, and then mate on the back rank is now inevitable and can't be stopped. Why is that? Because if the rook swings it, if the king tries to run, we just take it. we just mate it rather, and if the rook tries to interpose, we just take it. So this all goes to show why the third rank is not a good defense. So just to run through the line again, if he tries to go to the third rank, we swing. We check in the middle first to try to force the black king into the same line as the rook, which it does. Because if he goes the other way, we're going over here and checkmating. Then we threaten the mate. Then we check again back into the same line as the rook. This should be the more important variation. And so we have this setup with the bishop defending the rook. The rook is on the c file, which we'll see is an important idea. We then drop back to the fourth rank and then deliver checkmate. Okay, so that's why the third rank is not a good defense for black. So probably we've gone to the worst of these three squares. Now let's look at the best of these three squares. The best of these three squares is probably the second rank, because if the bishop ever moves, the black rook has a check on the white king and it's on a light coloured square, so the bishop can never defend that square. In fact, this is such a good square for the black rook that white's technique is to do a waiting move. Just wait. And now, the black rook can't go back to where it was before because as we swing across and mate on the back rank. Okay. It can't go to any of these four squares because they're all defended. So it only has two yellow squares to go to. What about the black king? The black king can't go here because it'll just get mated. Let's checkmate. And it can't go here because again it'll just get checkmated. Okay, so black is rather short. So we just did a waiting move, and black is rather short of options. Is there anything else black can do? If he moves along this... The point is that if he moves his rook anywhere along this rank, white has a checkmate. So the black rook has to keep guard over this square. He has to keep guard over this square. And so he has to go to one of the two yellow squares. Now we've already seen how the third rank is. We've discussed this already. If he goes to the third rank, we can then just follow the same pattern as we did last time. So rook here, check, etc. So we're going to assume that he goes to the first rank, and then we're going to show how we can force that rook onto the third rank. So the first rank is slightly worse because now he doesn't have such easy access to checks from behind. It's possible for our bishop to move and control those checks. Okay, now what is the strategy for white? So first we threaten mate on the back rank, and there is no defense by running the king because the two red squares are controlled. So he has to defend with the rook. Then we swing across to the other side, and he has to defend with the rook. Now what have we achieved by swinging to one side and the other? Well, all we've achieved is getting our rook onto the c file, where it's defended by the bishop. And then, so before we wanted to bring our rook back to the fourth rank, because we wanted to defend a bishop dropping back here. But now we can immediately just drop the bishop back, defended by our rook. And what does that achieve? What it does is it stops checks on our king, but it also stops the rook going to the second rank. In the meantime, we're still threatening mate on the back rank. So the black king can't move. So why can't the black king move? That's actually not completely obvious. Black king could move. But if the black king moves, we simply drop back to c4, and we threaten bishop f6 and rook c8 checkmate. And there's nothing he can do. What can he do to stop these two? This check, king here, and rook here checkmate. Nothing he can do. That will just get taken. So the black king can't move. Of course, if the king goes there, it's just checkmate. And the black rook can't move anywhere along the rank because otherwise it's checkmate. So he must move along the file. But this square is taken by the bishop. These four are taken, and this one you just swing across and checkmate. So there's only one square he can move to, which is the third rank. And now we're in business. We're going to threaten mate on the back rank, so now we're controlling that blocking square. There's no defense. Black has to throw in a check. He might think, oh, we've achieved something because the white bishop is now pinned to the king. But what does he do? The mate is still threatened, so he has to go back to defend that mate. And now we've achieved the third rank position which we discussed earlier. So the way to finish this off is what we said earlier. You first throw a checkmate here. If he goes the wrong way, we just mate him on h8. We still threaten mate on the back rank, so he runs further. You throw in another 7th rank check. He has to go back. So we've lined the king and rook up, and we've got this brilliant position where our king is hiding behind our bishop, and the bishop is protecting our rook. And we drop our rook back to the 4th rank, that important strategy. And we said that, well, everything's lost now. And the point is that if the king were to try to run, we do this, stopping the checks and threatening checkmate and blocking the rook file. So the only thing you can do is throw in a pin, and then this is the genius move. We just move one file to the left and we're still threatening checkmate, and there's the defense is to interpose the rook, but the bishop is defending that square. Okay, so running it back right the way from the beginning, this has been the second Lucena position. And black's best defense is to go to the 2nd rank when white plays a waiting move, forcing him to go to the 1st rank, which is slightly worse. And then white swings across and swings back, threatening mate, all for the purpose of having the rook and bishop perfectly lined up. And the bishop then controls the 2nd rank and controls the checking square. So black is in a kind of zugzwang and has to go to the 3rd rank, and then we've already seen how to deal with the 3rd rank. So we first threaten mate and then put the bishop back, protecting the king. And now we're in our 3rd rank position. With check. Remember, if he goes the other way, we just swing across and mate on h8. So we again threaten the mate, and then we check. If he goes further, we just have a discovery, picking up the rook. We drop back, threatening bishop d4. And now the really cunning move to finish it off, because we had this brilliant mate, bishop here, checkmate. Now we can't do it because the bishop is pinned. Just simply swing our rook just another file to the left, and there's no defense. If the rook tries to, if he takes, that's easy. If the rook tries to interpose, we take it. So that has been the Philidor position, rook and bishop against rook, and how the rook and bishop can win. Now, it was very important in that final position to be able to swing your rook one file to the left. So if we actually translate the Philidor position so it's slightly closer to the edge of the board, then some of those mates don't work in quite the same way. So in this position, again, rook e1. So we might swing across to try and checkmate. He tries to block. We move our bishop back to control the checking square, and we get into this 3rd rank position. Okay, so we threaten mate on the back rank. He checks us, and we block. Okay, so all this would be exactly the same as in the standard Philidor position. Rook g3 check. Sorry, rook g3 defending the mate, and then we have this check in the middle of the board. We threaten checkmate, and normally in the standard Philidor position we would now throw in a check here, and then we have this idea of dropping back to here and dropping this back to here, and then if necessary moving the rook one file to the right and noticing that the black rook can't go here because it gets taken, and so we mate him on this square here. But we can't do that now, because the h file is the final row of the chessboard. So rook h7 is not the winning move. The winning move is to switch across to check on the h file. So we go rook c4. So it's this, we're still going back to the 4th rank. And now what? So with the black rook has to stay on the black king can't move. It's completely paralyzed. If the king were to move here, rook here would be checkmate. So the black rook has to move somewhere. Obviously it can't go here because here would be checkmate. So suppose without loss of generality it goes here. Then we throw in a check. Here. Bishop e6 check. And so this is the technique. And we checkmate him. So the fact he can't run to the right, we use the fact that we can't move the rook to the right of the h file. We use that to our advantage to swing across. We say we've got the king cornered, we're going to swing across to the h file and then use this check and checkmate. So just to run through this again, it's very similar to the Philidor position if we translate it. Same maneuver, but after this sequence of checks we don't deliver this check protected by the bishop. We swing back and use the h file. So that's sometimes called the lolly position, and lolly was a contemporary of Philidor. And so this shows how this is still winning for white. So now let's just quickly show you how in general the black rook can defend against the rook and the bishop. Now one way of defending is something called the Cochrane defense, and it's exactly the same as the Philidor position, except the king and the bishop are pushed one rank further back. And unfortunately for the white king, it can't get closer to the black king because otherwise he'll lose his bishop. With check as well, because of the way it's lined up. So you can't threaten mate because you'll lose your bishop with check if you threaten mate. So what's the black strategy? The black strategy is just to just shuffle up and down and keep the pin. And so white can't make any progress unless he moves his king. Now comes phase 2 of black strategy, which is to move your own king in the opposite direction. And he liberates his bishop. The moment he does that, okay, we try and take control of the 2nd rank, or the 7th rank here. So white had our king penned to the back rank, so we liberate our king. So that was phase 3 of our strategy. And we're going to move as close to the center of the board as possible. And we're going to harass the king and keep it cut. Now, white can push us back to the 2nd rank, and maybe even sometimes to the 1st rank. But what we're going to do is just try and keep the king cut, and probably what he's going to do is try and use the bishop to interpose. So he tries to interpose with the bishop so that he can then make progress against our king. And then what we can actually do is reach the Cochrane defense position again by simply checking the king from behind. And the only way of escaping those checks is in fact to block with the bishop. And then we shuffle up and down, and if he checks us, okay, we willingly go back to the back rank, but we're back in this Cochrane defense, where the white king can't get close to us. So this is one way of defending for the weaker side. Just worth mentioning briefly, instead of trying to cut the king, there's another way of defending, which is bringing the rook back to the 2nd rank. And this is called the 2nd rank defense. So king and rook don't have to lose against rook and bishop. We can just shuffle up and down on the 2nd rank, and it's very hard for white to make progress. Having said that, you have to be careful. So for example, suppose instead of moving the rook, I moved the king in this position. Now notice both king and rook are on light squares, so that's already a sign something might be afoot. White can throw in a check and then pin the rook, and black is immediately lost. So one has to be slightly careful. but it's possible to maintain a second rank defense. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed the Philidor position, the way of winning with a rook and a bishop against a rook if you ever reach this position, and it does come up a lot, and also the way of defending so that you don't ever get into the position, which is basically don't let your king get cut off on the back rank, or if you do, don't let the opponent king get to the 6th rank. So if you ever get into a position where your king is cut off in the 7th rank, try and make sure the opponent king can't reach the 6th rank by pinning its bishop to its king, by checking the king from behind. And if you can ever get yourself free from the 8th rank, you have a 2nd rank defense. So I hope you enjoyed the chess meal video. Do subscribe to Chess Meal, and you can see in the links below more information about myself, my Crazy House blog, other videos I've done, such as Geometry of Chess, and enjoy the next video from Chess Meal. Make sure you're subscribed so you get notifications.